Hello everybody, welcome to the second episode of IT Idiots. I'm Nicholas Hill and joined again by Nikki Curtis.
Hi.
And our resident pharmacist learning IT, Shabby Naqvi.
Hi.
So I'm going to hand over to Nikki and he can talk a little bit about what we're going to do this week.
Okay, yeah. What I was doing this week, a continuation from last week really, what we had a look at last week was work groups and domains. And since looking at the podcast, we actually had a kind of idea, and we're going to change things around a little bit. And what we're going to do today is actually start by creating our own domain, the itidiots.com domain. And the idea behind that is we can use that domain and work on that from week to week, building up on technical aspects of it. But it also gives us the flexibility to sort of demonstrate Exchange, mail service, and also SMS, systems management service. So it gives us a great deal of flexibility in demonstrating what people are using out there, really, in sort of like a real-life environment.
That sounds quite good. So we're going to build it from the ground up and really...
Yeah, so today all I've got is Windows Server 2003. It's Enterprise Edition. You can use any version you wanted to, as in Standard or Enterprise. Not quite every version you wanted to, really, I suppose. But yeah, you can download the evaluation for this. So if you want to follow through, you can just go to Microsoft.com or just Google it, and you can download an evaluation of it. It's actually 2 CDs worth. I think one's about 600 meg, one's 200 megabytes. About that.
Okay. Well, I guess after last week, there are probably a couple of things that you're happy to find out. First one is that we actually went and bought itidiots.com.
Yep, so we got that, and that's going to form the basis of our, I almost said our fake domain then. I mean, our very realistic, ultra-realistic domain.
Yeah, I mean, we built the server rooms and everything. I guess we'll have to try and get some footage of that later on.
Yeah, so the server rooms are all built up. They're quite big in an off-site location, so just...
and I was very happy with the testing on the air conditioning systems.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, we're going to host it here, but we're right underneath the Heathrow flight path. And, for obvious fault tolerance reasons, we it's just a no-go. We're not going to do that. And so, yeah,
safety first.
And what I'm going to be doing is RDP into them. So, it's almost like they're in the flat. I'll be RDPing
it's
across
amazing.
the internet. It's going to be amazing.
Well, I think this technology is going to catch on,
Amazing. You bought it, Shelly?
Oh, no.
So, we spent this week, we had a go with the editing. And,
well, you did. I didn't do anything.
And we put together some intro and some credits, which we've put together onto episode 1. We're actually filming episode 2 before releasing episode 1. To do with, I guess...
Sort of like Star Wars, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. We're filming several back-to-back, and nothing to do with the fact that we all have real jobs and a lack of time. Plus, not to put too fine a point on it, I've been in agony all week
we did too.
With my tooth. So I'd like to thank my dentist, not that she'll probably ever watch this, but she managed to save me from what I feel was near certain death, and charged me 500 quid for the privilege. So
that's always good.
Any donations towards the tooth would be welcome. So I guess that's been my week. Let's get to the fun stuff.
Yeah. So last week, Shabby, we set you up some homework, didn't we? And I can't quite remember what it was, but I seem to remember it was looking at the specification of your machine after you told us it had 60 gigs worth of memory. I think you decided perhaps you ought to do a little bit of work on finding out what spec your machine is and how to find them. So
Okay.
you've got 2 machines, dude, haven't you? Your desktop machine. Let's go first.
Machine. Okay, it's I mentioned to you that it was a time machine.
It's a time machine, yeah.
And it possesses an AMD Athlon processor. The model is an XP 2000 Plus.
I'm impressed.
And its speed is 1.67 gigahertz. It has 512 megabyte of RAM, and it has hard disk capacity of 73 gig.
73, so that's probably
it's probably 80 gig.
80,
80
yeah,
gig,
that's
yeah.
fine. That one.
That's your PC. That's your time PC. That's pretty good. I mean,
I'm actually quite impressed that you actually got any results, to be honest. What did you use? Do you know what tool you used?
Yeah, I went to my computer and then somehow found Device Manager.
Okay.
And in Device Manager, it just gives you quite straightforward.
I mean, it's easy, isn't it? But now you know where to go. If you're looking at buying a game, you can find out. Well, actually, that's not going to run anything, is it, to be honest?
It might run some of the retro classics that you can buy for $5.99 from PC World,
I reckon Solitaire.
or any other good generic software shop.
What about your dubiously sourced laptop?
Okay, it's an Advent 7016. It's got a Pentium 4 CPU. It's 2.66 gigahertz processor speed. It has 512 megabyte RAM and a 40 gig hard disk.
Not bad. So that's going to be... Which one are you going to stick iTunes on?
That one.
The laptop, yeah.
Yeah. I've already done so.
That's got good web browsing capabilities and
Yep.
music playing and...
not a bad machine. Quite cheap as well.
Oh, yeah. Heavily borrowed.
Did I say anything else?
Oh, yes.
The specifications of the server products, wasn't it? Yeah. Last week what we did, we had a look at Windows 2003 server, and I think I asked Chevy to come back and tell us what the specifications were.
You need the minimum requirements.
Yeah, minimum
That's
requirements.
right, yeah, we were looking for the
He's
minimum
telling us.
requirements.
So, I mean, in terms of hardware, you need a PC which is greater than 300
I
megahertz.
suppose you could get a Mac now, but let's not go there. Okay, sorry.
233 hertz. Single audio processor. I'm not going to quote this because I've
That's
just
fine,
copied
yeah.
it. 128 megabyte of RAM.
Yeah.
A higher is recommended. A 1.5 gig of hard disk space.
Yeah.
And the other, obviously, the hardware stuff that you need, like a VGA and a DVD drive and a keyboard.
And a keyboard.
Anyway.
What about mouse?
Anyway, okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well let's delve straight in because I feel it's getting boring already. And after looking at the specifications, or after Chevy read out those specifications, I just want to introduce you, Chevy, to a server. So what we're looking at now is Windows 2003 server.
Okay.
Now, I'm not going to take you through the installation because the installation is quite straightforward, and if you can install XP, you can install the server product. That's not too much of an issue. And I won't spend any more time than necessary with you, Chevy, so yeah, you can Google that one as well. But I'm looking at the server product. All I've done is installed it, and I brought up to Service Pack 1. I haven't hot-fixed any more than that because we haven't had a great deal of time, but it's fairly realistic. It's just newly installed. It's got Service Pack 1 on it, and at the moment this machine is just a server. And what we're going to do today is turn it into a domain controller. And when we turn it into a domain controller, it's going to establish our domain, our IT Idiots domain. So what we're going to have a look at is the process of turning a server machine, this one, into a domain controller. And once we've done that, we can bolt on Exchange service to it, SMS onto it, file service, print service. But it's really the starting point for the IT Idiots network. So there's a few things we need to ask ourselves first before we delve into this, what is generally referred to as a DC promo, domain controller promotion. And now it's got to have a name, so that our domain's got to have a name. And it's just a name which has got to encompass the whole organisation, hopefully a name with some scope. We don't want to be, creating a domain called london.itidiots.com when we're so obviously going to break into, multinational stardom at some point, and we would have to rename the domain.
Absolutely.
So we need something with scope in that. Right. So with the domain, it needs two different types of domain name. It needs to have a DNS domain name and also a NetBIOS domain name. Now the DNS domain name is for Active Directory networks. So with your XP machine that we looked at last week, and if you haven't looked at last week, just to recap, we just had a domain and we had a single client that joined that domain. So what the client needs to know in order to join a domain, it needs to know the name of it, and we saw that last week. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't recall what we called the thing.
It was the IT Idiots.
It was the IT
domain.
Idiots.
Yeah, it was.
Okay,
the
well
IT
we
Idiots
ripped everything
domain.
apart and we're starting again from scratch. So I'm going to call the DNS name of this. Come on. ad.itidiots.com. Now, as an organisation, IT Idiots, we've actually bought the domain name itidiots.com, so we actually own that. And the common practice for naming your Active Directory name is to take a delegated subdomain of your internet presence. And that's exactly what it sounds like a mouthful, but what I've done is what we've done is we've taken the name itidiots.com and we've taken a subdomain of that AD, and that forms the name of our domain.
Mhm.
Now, the benefits of this is we own itidiots.com, and if we ever want to host Active Directory on the internet, which, it might well happen at some point, we can tie in with that. We just put an NS record on the DNS server on the internet and point it internally. Don't worry about that too much, Shifty, on that. So that's the DNS domain name, ad.itidiots.com. Now, domains have been around for quite a long time, and certainly before Active Directory, Microsoft did have the concept for domain, and they're referred to as NetBIOS domains now. Now, to maintain compatibility, for example, if a 95 or a 98 machine was to log on to this new domain, it hasn't got a clue what ad.itidiots.com is. It's looking for a flat name. So that flat name is referred to as a NetBIOS name. And the NetBIOS name I'm going to choose for this is just itidiots. Okay, so the DNS name is ad.itidiots.com, the NetBIOS name is itidiots.com. And again, this is just so an older client, when they're logging on or looking for the domain, they're looking for the NetBIOS domain name itidiots. When an XP client or a 2000 client or an AD client tries to look for the domain, they're looking in DNS for a domain called ad.itidiots.com. And again, it's a lot of information, but as we install it, we can have a look at the end results and have a look at these names in DNS and also in the Windows Server console. So that's two things I've worked out. The name of it, the Active Directory name, ad.itidiots.com, and the NetBIOS name, itidiots. Now, the next thing on your domain controller is the database. The account database is basically going to be stored on the hard disk somewhere, and that hard disk has got to be NTFS for obvious reasons, for security. Now, Shabby, we haven't covered FAT or NTFS. We will do, but just very, very briefly, on your file server, the hard disk can be formatted using FAT or NTFS. Now, FAT's kind of old. You can't have any security. It's very hard to secure FAT files.
FAT stands for
File Allocation Table. And I forgot what I was going to say now. That's FAT. And NTFS is better. No, with NTFS you can have security. You can secure your files.
more secure.
Yeah, and we will have a podcast on file system security, but now is not the time. We're into installing our domain controller. So this machine has got an NTFS partition. I can just check on this. In actual fact, I've just installed this, so it's really, really basic. And I've just gone there for some reason. So I'm just going to go to my C drive, right-click on the C drive, go down to Properties, and we can see there it's NTFS. So that's fine, it's all ready to go. And I think what I'll do now is I'll just start the DC promoing stage off now. So to do that, we just do Start, go into Run, and just type in DC promo. Now, there's no shortcut for DC promo because it's not the kind of tool you're going to be running every day. Right. You just do this once to set up your network. So DC promo. Start DC promo.
Okay.
So welcome to the Active Directory installation wizard. Blah blah blah. Not very exciting text there. But to continue, click on Next. Domain controllers running Windows Server 2003 implement security settings that require clients and other servers to communicate with those domain controllers in a more secure way. What this is basically saying is when I'm setting up this domain now, it's asking me really how secure I want this to be. If I want ultimate security, I'm really saying to your older clients that you can't come on this domain. 95, you're out of it. 98, you're out of it, etc. You can't come onto it. So really that's what that dialog box is about. And what I'm going to say is this domain controller that I'm starting is a domain controller for a new domain. I feel I'm all over the place at the moment.
No, it's fine. It's making sense.
Okay, so a domain controller for a new domain, and we're going to create a new forest. And these terms I will define when it starts actually setting it up. Now, we talked about the name of the domain. We were going to call it ad.itidiots.com. Click on Next. And the NetBIOS name, it will actually recommend, well, it will actually come back and ask me if I want to call it AD, because it just takes the first portion of the DNS name. Now, hello Anna. All I want to do is call it itidiots. At the moment the pause is it's just checking the DNS server that this machine's configured with to see if that domain already exists, to see if someone else owns it.
Yeah.
Okay. So past that check, and now it's asking me what the NetBIOS name is going to be. So I'll just itidiots and click on Next. And again, the little pause here is just checking with Wins this time, doing a local broadcast just to see if that domain already exists.
Yeah.
Right, the location of the database file, so the database, typical to most databases, there's a data portion and a transactional portion. You could
Put that on a separate drive,
You
possibly.
yeah, certainly with SQL databases, you often separate the transaction log and the data files out. However, for Active Directory, this is not like a massive SQL database. It is a very important database, but I don't think that's going to be the bottleneck in many situations. So I'm going to keep them on my C drive, Extended drive I've got anyway. So we'll click on next. Okay, location for the sysvol folder. Didn't really want to click all the way through that. But the location of the sysvol folder, every domain controller has got something called a sysvol. That sysvol contains logon scripts which the clients will run during a logon session. It also contains something called group policies. Now, a group policy is a way to secure and lock down a client machine. So what I could do is I could create a group policy that disables your run command, so you can't get to run. That will be stored in the group policy template file, which is stored in the sysvol. And the sysvol is on every single domain controller. Quite simply, because when a client logs on, we don't know what domain controller it's going to go to, so it's that directory is replicated to all of the other machines. Now, some of the other dialogues I clicked straight through there was, one of them was asking for a directory services recovery password or restore password. In the event of this domain controller failing, what we would have to do is reboot it into a special mode, Active Directory Restore mode, which is an F8 option.
Okay.
And you would then use an alternative password, the Active Directory Restore password, to do a recovery.
That's obviously because it can't authenticate you against...
Yeah, because the trouble is, Active Directory is down, the database is down, so you can't log on. So this information is just stored in an alternative area.
It's a backdoor, really, isn't it, to be able to recover it?
Yeah. It's actually kind of important you should mention that, because it is a backdoor. And likewise, as I used to do quite a lot of MCSE training, and I wonder how many recovery passwords are out there with the password.
Password, yeah.
Because often people just copy straight from their notes, which is remarkably stupid.
Oh, so they'd actually get the notes and you'd have the in brackets password and somebody would actually...
They'll just copy it, yeah.
You reckon people are actually doing this out there?
They would try
Phenomenal.
and put square brackets around it and put it in italics
Yeah,
as well.
I've seen this, yeah.
But hey, there are no stupid questions. It's wrong. What it's doing now is DNS and WINS are sort of core to setting up a domain, because I'm setting up the domain now, IT Idiots. What I said earlier is if a client machine like a Windows XP machine wants to log on to that domain, it needs to find it. So what this domain controller is actually doing now, as well as setting its role up, is it's looking in DNS to see if the DNS server that this client is pointing to can support the new Active Directory name, and it will actually create the records, and it will create the what's called service records inside that DNS server. Now, it's not going to find it, because what I did is, and again this is fairly typical that you do in reality for your first domain controller, is I've set up the DNS server that this client's using to point to itself. Now I know it hasn't got a DNS server, so what's going to happen is this is going to actually go through and install DNS for me.
Of course.
So it's configuring DNS, and it's all done. So
that was fairly painless.
It's not so hard at all. Click on finish. Has to have a restart, so we're probably going to lose the old capture at that point.
Not a problem, that's edited, it's
No,
gone.
Edit out.
It's
And
gone.
it's just going to reboot, and when it comes back on, we'll have a look at exactly what it's done.
Yeah.
Okay, so the domain controller is back up now, so it's just rebooted. And the first thing I can show you that's slightly different now is, well, I suppose I didn't show you before, but it's different, take my word for it, is the log on to box now says IT Idiots, which is the name of the NetBIOS domain, IT Idiots. So what I'm going to do is just log on to this machine with my ultra secure password.
See, that's where people's problems come from. You're teaching them to use the word password.
You just gave away my password.
I've done it
You
now.
know.
Oh, edit
Well,
point.
you didn't actually. It was quite sneaky. It was almost social engineering, really, wasn't it? I fell for that.
I think so. See, that's where the weak point is these days.
Okay, so going back to my machine, if I look in my administrative tools now, again, it's something I didn't show you before, but you can see I've got 3 Active Directory tools there. I've got Active Directory users of computers, which is going to allow me to create user accounts in my new domain, IT Idiots. I've got Active Directory domains and trusts. This allows this domain to work together with another domain, maybe with a partnering organisation, so I can print to that partnering organisation's printer, or vice versa, something like that. It's also used to sort of glue together a collection of old NT4 domains.
That might be over a wide area network.
It could be over a wide area network, or a different administration.
Sure.
Like that. And the other one is Active Directory sites and services. And this deals with, again, not really a topic for today, but this deals with the replication of information between domain controllers.
Gotcha.
Now, at the moment, the IT Idiots domain only contains one domain controller, this one we're looking at here. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, there's a huge issue with fault tolerance. If this goes down, no one can log on. So, in our network here, what we will be doing at some other point is introducing another domain controller to it, and we can have a look at the replication.
Fault tolerance here then.
Yeah, have a look at fault tolerance, and also accessibility is another keyword anyone likes to hear. So I'm just going to load up Active Directory users and computers. Admin tools we were, and I was talking about the administration tools that have just been installed as a result of this machine becoming a domain controller. And really those tools are obviously just for administering the domain that we've just created. Now the one we had a look at last week was Active Directory users and computers. I don't know if you recall that. And let's just have a look at it now. We can see at the top, we can see the name of the domain there is just ad.itidiots.com. And if I open that up, we can see what exists inside the domain. Now, can you give me an example of an object that exists inside of a domain, Shabby? What exists in the domain? What is the domain? What am I looking at? Come on. What's the purpose of the thing we're just creating? I mentioned it's going to establish the network. It's going to set up the network. But what's going to be inside this mystical database?
Different computers linked onto one big server. So different users.
It's going to have users in there. Mm-hmm. It's definitely going to have users in there. Now, the only reason this is like a centralized database that consists of objects, basically, and these objects primarily are going to be users or computers. But there's plenty of other objects that go in there. But let's concentrate on users and computers. So, for example, inside Active Directory, if you were a user in IT Idiots, which you are, so you're going to have an account in Active Directory. Now what that's going to have in it is just going to have the fact that you exist, your username, your password, and where you live, that kind of thing. And the only reason you're in there is so that when you log on to the domain in the morning, you can say, hi, I'm Shabby, this is my password. And the Active Directory has done its job at that point, just lets you on. So it's just like a centralized database that knows who you are, knows what your password is, and you check with that database when you log on in the morning.
So he's a security guard, basically, for your system.
Yeah. Total security. So if the Active Directory's gone down, you can't log on for obvious reasons. I can't check to see if your password's right or your password's wrong. So inside this Active Directory database, we have user accounts, we have computer accounts as well. Now last week we saw that when we joined a Windows XP machine to the domain, that Windows XP machine created a computer account, which was just underneath this section in Active Directory, users and computers, it would be underneath that. And when I have a look inside the computers container, you can see there's nothing in there because I've just created the domain.
Sure.
Stupid. Okay, if I go into domain controllers, we can see there's one domain controller in there.
Which is our IT Idiots.
Which is the one we're looking at right now, is this one, so IT Idiots, or ITI DMC01. Now what I've tried to do here is to keep it as real world as possible. We've established just a little bit of a naming convention. Now the naming convention I'm using for my servers is I'm choosing the first three characters of the company, ITI, okay, because it's, we're going to be compatible with ICIs. So we're going to have ITI, it's a domain controller, so next three letters describe the role, DMC, and it's my first one, 01. So this is called ITI DMC01. Now when we install the SMS server on the other podcast, it's going to be called, well, probably ITI SMS01.
SMS01, yeah.
And for Exchange,
SQL, all of them.
All of those, just find some kind of 3-character abbreviation for the role. And that's quite nice. Just by looking at it, I know exactly what it is. It's a domain controller.
So I shouldn't really be calling mine Linda, Sally and Murphy then?
No.
I don't think so.
No. Or characters from The Simpsons, which I've seen before. Or what's even worse is characters from Star Trek.
You know who you are.
Right, so that's my domain controller. We're just as bad for doing this kind
of
thing, I suppose. So you can see the domain controller, it's all up and running. What can I show you now? Well, if I go into users, this has all just been created in the last 10 minutes or so, and this is a few user accounts which are created by default. Now, one of the user accounts, the one on the top left, is administrator, this one here. And that's who I've currently logged on as. So I log on as the administrator so I can actually create further users and allow them to log on. So just as a bit of a recap from last week, let's just create a user account for Shabby. And I'm just going to go up and use this shortcut here, create a new user account. And your first name is Shabby. Your last name is M-A-Q-V-I.
I still haven't come up with a good description yet for him.
And your full name is, let's see if I can remember this. Is that it?
Close. Double S-A-I-N.
S-A.
Yeah. Delete the E's. S-I-N. A-I-N.
That's right.
Is that right, Jim?
That would
It'll do.
That would do. Okay, and your Shabby,
Use log, right?
and your logo name is shabby@itidiots.com. Now, when we have a look at this user now, we can see your full name is whatever. Well, actually, your first name, your last name, your full name. That's just what we refer to as data fill. It's just information which is stored in Active Directory. It's not heavily used by the authentication process. When you log on to the network, what you're doing is you're logging on as one of these two boxes. Your user logon name, which is shabby@itidiots.com, and that's your Active Directory name. Okay, but your NetBIOS name is shabby to the NetBIOS domain called ITidiots. So if you were sitting at an NT4 machine, or a machine that predated Active Directory, NT4, 95, 98, etc. Actually 95 you wouldn't use in 2003 networks, not supported. But if you're on an NT4 machine, you can log on to shabby@ad.itidiots.com. You'll say, no, I don't understand that logon name, it doesn't work for me. You would have to log on as shabby to the NetBIOS name called ITidiots. Whereas if you were sitting at an XP machine, you could log on as shabby@ad.itidiots.com.
Mm-hmm.
And that's from a remote server?
This is just from your client machine, so this is sitting at your desk.
Okay.
If you were sitting at your desk, you just got into work, you could log on. If you're sitting on an NT4 machine, or something that predates Active Directory, you would log on as the bottom one, shabby, into the ITidiots domain.
Shabby.
Now we're going to have some time to have an NT4 client and an Active Directory client up. So we will get, again, more into depth on the client side of things when we look at the clients. You should know this from last week.
What?
No, I didn't go that far into depth, actually. Okay.
No, but we gave him a book to read.
Yeah.
How did you get on with that?
So I'll just give you the standard password, click on next, and that's it. And now you're a user of that domain, so I can see, say Shabby Owl, you say Nappy is a user of that domain.
I have a question.
Go.
He's going to log in as Shabby and then his password. How realistic do you think that is? Do you think it's more likely that you're going to want to set it up as first name dot last name?
Well, yeah, normally
for your larger corporations, there might not be too many Shabbies, but there are going to be a lot of Nicks.
This is true.
Or Pauls, or
Not many Nickies though. Okay, yeah, naming conventions. Just like the server, when we had a naming convention, it's kind of important that we have a naming convention for your users and your groups, etc. And that way you can make sure you don't have any duplicate entries as, you know, your account database gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So, you know, at the moment, I called your Shabby's logon name. I forget what it is now, but let's just go back into that user account. I can just right-click and go to Properties. A whole host of tabs awaits you there, but I'm just interested in the Account tab. And you can see both of Shabby's logon names are there. You can log on to shabby@ad.itidiots.com or shabby to the NetBIOS domain ITidiots. Okay, so what we could have done from that is just think about the size of the company and come up with a decent naming convention. Now, you know, typical naming conventions out there, the company I'm working with at the moment is, it's actually first name, first initial. So I'm Nicky C.
okay.
Now, you know, I would say that that's not the most typical one out there because, of course, there could be another Nicky C, you know, quite easily. Nicky Clark, I should say.
He could be doing some hair on site.
So where I currently work at the moment to employ me, my username is N Curtis, which has got a lot more uniqueness to it. But, you know, it could be first name dot last name Nicky dot Curtis.
Which is in fact what I run with.
Yeah, because first name dot last names.
With 5 users, if we were to take on a sixth,
Exactly.
we run the risk that we could take on another Nicholas Hill.
It's true, it's a hideous thought, but...
Thanks, guys.
Anyway, let's go back onto this techie stuff. So that's your user account. Right, so not very exciting at the moment. I've just got an Active Directory domain. We're looking at now, all the user accounts going there. But with the Active Directory domains, there's so much more to them than the NT4 domains because, well, I can give it structure. I can organise it. You can already see on the left-hand side, my users are under one container. Okay, my computers are under another container. My domain controllers are under another container. So I've already got organisation. Now in NT4, they were just all in one place.
Yeah.
All in one place. So what I could do now is, let's have a look at our organisation. Now, IT Idiots, we've got, well, our head office, I would have to say, is in Surbiton, but we've got branch offices in Ashford, in Dudley, and in Portsmouth, I believe. So we've got a few branch offices around.
We do.
And what I might decide to do is actually split up my user account so that a Dudley user appears in the... I can't do that. A Dudley user appears in the Dudley OU, an Ashford user appears in the Ashford OU, etc. So let's just have a look at playing around with the domain a little bit by creating an organisational unit.
Yep.
Now, an organisation unit is much like a folder on a hard disk. In actual fact, if you think about Active Directory and think about your hard disks, it's not so dissimilar. They're both hierarchical. You can use them for organising, your spreadsheets in one folder. I can put my Ashford users in one OU. So I'm going to just call this top-level organisation locations. And actually, sort of best practice now, this is hot off the press from Microsoft, is to name the top-level OUs in capitals.
Okay.
Okay, so top-level OUs in capitals. I'm going to create underneath that locations OU, one for Surbiton. Also, our other locations, we've got Ashford. Actually, I should put locations UK because they're obviously going to be multinational.
Yes, of course. So, yeah, would make sense.
Let's keep it a little bit simple at the moment. Ashford, Dudley.
I think we've just closed the Dudley office.
Have we? Well, you get cheap labour up there.
Okay.
So anyway, that's our location, Surbiton, Ashford and Dudley. And because Shabby lives in Surbiton, actually, Shabby, I don't want you in Surbiton, you're in Dudley. I can take Shabby's user account. Notice where I created it. I created it under the user's container. And I can say, right, actually, Shabby, you are in Dudley. Okay, moving objects in Active Directory, you can read that out, guys, but I will go through the importance of that at some other point. Just like I'll do my homework later.
So we've been able to segregate Shabby here quite nicely.
Yeah, so I think what we'll do is I'm going to create myself a user account as well. So I'm in Surbiton. We're all in Surbiton at the moment, but I actually live here. So last name is Curtis. And the user logon name, I'm actually going to go... Should we establish a naming convention at this point? I think we ought to.
I think we should. It's early on.
What's our naming convention? So we do... You've got a bloody good first name, haven't you, Nicholas?
If I can be...
Mind you, I don't have to type it, do I?
No.
What's your first name dot last name?
I think first name dot last name. I like it.
You can be side.shabby.al.
Make it a nice long...
So I'm going to be nicky.curtis@ad.id.
And can we make it a policy that it always clears down the username, so he has to type it in every time?
I think so. But that will be delving onto the policy episode. Okay, so that's just my user account, and in Ashford, let's create Nicholas. Yeah. Whoops. You're not going to tell a joke or anything exciting?
Have I got one L? Or
Do
two?
you want two?
I'd like to.
Okay.
And ironically, actually,
I was just saving storage on the hard disk.
And a lot of the time, people actually like to make that plural for no good reason whatsoever.
Oh, were you Nicola Hill?
No, plural,
well,
plural singular. It's
Well, Nicola
hills. Hills.
Oh,
People
okay,
like to
okay,
call me
yeah.
Hills.
Okay, gotcha. Do you remember Mrs. Hill, our maths teacher?
Oh, I remember Miss Hill.
We had a maths teacher, Mrs. Hill. She was.
Was that at
quite-
Clavering?
It was Clavering, yeah. It's quite an ironic name.
I didn't have her.
She wasn't very hilly. Anyway, let's go back to these locations. So just like I've got an OU now called locations, I've got Surbiton, Ashford and Dudley, and I've got each one of our user accounts underneath the corresponding OU. So we can go and have a lot of fun with that a bit later on. But let's do the same with computers as well. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an organisation unit called Workstations. And underneath that organisation unit called Workstations, which I'm just going to quickly capitalise, obviously, I'm going to subdivide the workstations into the operating system type.
Okay.
Okay, so let's have Windows XP. Now, yeah, let's do that.
Shabby going to be able to join his Spectrum to our...
You got Spectrum chat? You haven't got Spectrum at the moment. You were a Commodore man, weren't you?
I was, yes, a Commodore
Didn't
64.
do the Spectrum one.
Oh,
Were you Amiga? Did you go down that route?
No.
He got a life before then.
Did you?
Commodore 64 and then... break.
Nothing for 20 years.
Don't know what happened there.
Now, there's many reasons for organising these objects into different OUs. Now, the first reason you would create an OU, or the primary reason you create an organisation unit, as we get a little bit techy now, is for something called the delegation of administration.
Okay.
Now, what that means is I can hand over one of those organisation units to an administrator who wants to look after just those objects.
So he could specialise in just looking after your Windows XP machines, while somebody else with more knowledge...
Exactly. So the organisation IT Idiots, we've got our 3 locations, and let's say we're distributed by location. In Surbiton we've got an administrator, in Ashford we've got an administrator, and in Dudley we've got an administrator. And this design will fully support that, because what I can do is get the Surbiton administrator and give them permissions from that OU down, and they'll be able to look after that object, Surbiton, and anything underneath it.
Yep.
So that'd be all the Surbiton users. Likewise, do the same for Ashford and Dudley. Now, you just couldn't do that in NT4, and that's one of the huge advantages of Active Directory.
Yeah.
If you wanted to support this network in an NT4 network, you would have to have 4 domains. Okay, so you'd have to have an Ashford, a Surbiton, and a Dudley domain. And that's what I was talking about earlier, when we were talking about trusts, it's often to glue together these NT4 domains. You put trusts between them to sort of glue them together.
And we've also, in theory, taken 3 extra boxes out of the loop.
Yeah.
So
exactly. Yeah, we only got 1 DC at the moment. In practice, of course, we have minimum of 2 DCs. But yeah, in practice, you could say we've reduced our domain controllers from 6 minimum, really, to 2 per domain to 2. Yeah, exactly right. So significantly reduced total cost of ownership and all that stuff.
Good stuff.
Good stuff. Yeah, good stuff. Right. So that's just looking at the domain. Any questions?
No, no.
Right, you'll now be the administrator of...
Now, the other
Dudley.
thing I said is during the DC promo stage of this, it was actually setting up DNS for us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, any client machine who wants to join this domain now, we'll have a look at this again. It's not going to be this week, but maybe next week. When it joins the domain, I'm going to tell the XP client, can you join the domain called ad.itidiots.com? And the XP machine is going to say, well, where the hell's that then? How do I find out what that information is? Where is that domain controller? And what it's really looking for is its IP address. It needs to find out its IP address. Do you know much about IP addresses, Shabby?
Yeah, they're...
It's a phone number for your computer.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, it's a phone number for your computer. So it needs to find out its IP address. And in order to do that, it needs to look in DNS, which I suppose to carry the analogy on is like the phone book. Mm-hmm. So it's looking in the phone book. I want a plumber. Let's look in the yellow pages. I'm fucking good at it. I'm good at this. Okay, so what it's done is it's set up DNS on this machine. Let's have a look at what it's done. So I'm going to load up the DNS console on the server, and this machine is a DNS server itself as well.
Yeah.
Now the client machine would have to be configured with the IP address of the DNS server. Mm-hmm. It's got to. So this client machine would, the client machine that I want to join this domain would need to know the IP address of this machine here. And when I tell it to join ad.itidiots.com, it just does a name lookup. And it goes into ad.itidiots.com. And just to give you an idea of what's going on here, you can see quite clearly that that's the name of the domain, ad.itidiots.com. Now the XP machine knows that. You told it to join that domain. So straight away the XP machine looks straight into this zone here. The next thing the XP machine is going to do is look in this one, _MSDCS, Microsoft Directory Services. And in actual fact, the records haven't actually updated as yet on this machine. What happens is when you DC promo a machine, the records have to dynamically register in DNS, and I haven't given it enough time. But what you can actually do to speed up this process,
You can force it.
you can actually force it, yeah.
Let's stop.
Now, the service that authenticates you is called the NetLogon service. If I stop and start the NetLogon service, that service is actually responsible for updating DNS. Now, the reason it couldn't update DNS before, can you guess why? Because DNS wasn't actually installed at that point. Because remember, it installed it as alongside the DC promo. So we just start this up.
Are the IP addresses freely available to find for a client machine?
Well, at the moment, this network the network ITIDIOTS network is not connected to the domain, so I can pick and choose pretty much from any IP address I want. It's just got to be unique within the scope of my network, and the scope of my network is just 3 machines at the moment. However, there are some best practices when it comes to IP addresses. What they reckon you should do is choose an IP address from a private range. Now, the private range, they start with 10 dot.
Yep.
So 10.1.1.1 would be an example. The other one is 192.168 dot any number dot whatever the client number is.
Whatever.
Yeah, so it could be 192.168.1, 192.168.2, and the other one is 172.16. Okay, dot something dot something. Not many people know about that one. It's actually got a subnet mask, which is 255.240.0.0, which I'm probably losing you now, aren't I? We can do an IP one, you know, we can get onto that one. But yeah, the short answer is, because my network is really just isolated, I can pick and choose. However, I'm going to choose a recommended one, which is 192.168.
I think at this point, given Xavi's knowledge of IP addresses, I can sell you a really, really good one, a memorable one. So maybe 192.168.1.1 you can have for 20 quid.
Or 127.0.0.1 is quite a good one as well.
Yeah.
Geeks would appreciate that one, and it's best. Anyway, I've just typed ipconfig on my client machine, my server here, and you can see the IP address I've given it. It's actually got 2 network cards on this server, because it's actually as a router to the internet. It will do anyway as well. I've got 2 IP addresses. One of them is 192.168.5. It's on the network 192.168.5, and the other one's on the network 192.168.1. So again, best practices all the way.
And the 255.255.255.0 on the subnet mask, that I've noticed, it seems to be that's the default subnet mask, is it?
It's a can of worms really to go down there, but when you're choosing, when I have a look at this is fairly default, yeah.
Okay.
There's nothing special is going on this network. The subnet mask actually tells me what portion of the IP address is network and what portion of it is host.
Yeah.
So again, I can tell from the top IP address there, it's on the network 192.168.5. The next one's on the network 192.168.1.
Okay.
But there's some ands going on between them, some logical ands going between them, binary. Right, so that's the address. Now I've stopped and started that NetLogon, so if I go to this zone here and just do a refresh from here, we can see it's all updated now. So we said the client machine is going to log on. It's logging on to the domain ad.itidiots.com. I seem to have a bit of an issue with that ID idiots, I keep on saying. I don't know what that is.
Maybe we bought the wrong domain.
Maybe so, yeah. Anyway, so it's looking inside there, and it's looking for example, a domain controller. So going to DC, and every client belongs to a site. I'll go into that in a little more depth. But if I just keep on drilling down here, well, eventually I can see 2 records. One of them is Kerberos. It's saying, look, I've got a Kerberos service. Now, the Kerberos service is the authentication service.
Okay.
So that's, by looking at that, I'm saying Kerberos, that's a DC. That machine there is a DC. And it's pointing to itdmc01.at.itidiots.com, etc. Now, when I install another domain controller, you'll notice there'll be another record in there. So when the client looks in here, it can pick and choose one or the other. And it actually randomizes which one it uses. It uses DNS round robin to actually find one out. So that's just a little bit of DNS, but everything seems to be working okay. So that was it, guys. What we've got at the moment, we've got our first domain controller up and running. It's called itidiots.com. It's that's its NetBIOS name. Its DNS name is ad.itidiots.com. We've investigated the local administrator accounts. We know that's the one account we can now use to go and create further accounts, and that's what I've done. We've had a brief look at DNS, so we know that the DNS records for that domain controller are in there. Okay, so the DNS looks all okay, and that's pretty much it in terms of the domain creation. Now, how long are we going for, Nick?
I'd say you've probably got another 10 minutes if you wanted to take it.
Well, let's do
Although if you wanted to pause it at this point,
no,
you're going to have to now.
No, we won't. We'll do some. We're seamlessly over that.
Okay.
Fine. You heard nothing. Okay, MS Paint. Let's do some drawing. So on my little network here, what I've got is, let me just get a decent paintbrush. We've just created our first DC. Now later on, what we're going to do is we're going to install another domain controller. Now when you have two domain controllers like this, the idea is if one goes down, the other can take over. They've obviously got to have the same database on them. And when you have multiple domain controllers, what you need to do is you have to consider replication between the two domain controllers. Now I'm going to try and draw an arrow here. Oh yes, look at that. So these things are going to replicate between each other. Sort of see what's going on there. Now, at the moment I've got two domain controllers there. Now, one of the domain controllers is more important than the other domain controller. In actual fact, the first domain controller you create is the most important domain controller.
That's your primary.
Yeah, now, don't get confused with the term primary domain controller, because that's from MT4. But we use the term it's a PDC emulator now, okay, because there's no such thing as a PDC as such. But in a domain, there's 5 domain roles which sits on one, or it could be spread equally across your domain controllers. And what I want to do now is just have a look at those roles and find out what they do. Now my machine that you've just seen me DC promo holds all 5 of them. So let's call this the 5 FSMO roles. Flexible single master operation roles for some reason. That's what they're called. Now the first one is the schema master. So my machine up here is the schema master. Now I said, what does Active Directory actually contain? Remember what I said? Simplify it.
User accounts, locations, workstations.
Yeah, and what can we... And they're all basically objects. Yep. Okay, so it contains objects. I'm actually going to just drop this down actually. It contains objects. And each object has attributes. So for example, a user is an object. And a user contains a password, that's an attribute. It contains a description. Yeah, so we're seeing the object and their attributes afterwards. You take, for example, a printer, that's an object, isn't it? That contains paper size, that's an attribute. So that's what the schema is. The schema is just a definition of the objects and a definition of what attributes those objects can actually contain. So for example, a user is an object that can contain an attribute called password, an attribute called telephone number, those kind of things. Now this schema master in your domain controls updates to the schema. Now what you can do is you can have a look at the user account database and say, hang on a second, I just created a user called Shabby and I gave him a description, and I didn't actually put the address in, but you can, but I want to store his national insurance number. Now shh, Anna,
we've got an audience.
I want to have his national insurance number there. Now, when Microsoft created Active Directory, they weren't thinking of national insurance numbers and things like that. So what I can do is I can actually extend Active Directory. I can add a new attribute to it and say, look, there's a national insurance number attribute, and by the way, the user object can contain that new attribute. And that's referred to as a schema change. The schema master is responsible for updating or making sure that that information of that new attribute travels around all the other DCs.
Propagates it.
Yeah, so for all of us 3 here are DCs, I'm the schema master, obviously I'm the master. And if you want to update the user account, oh shit, coffee accident. If you want to update the user account, do we pause?
Yes, pause.
I don't think it went in the keys. Oh, this is all good.
But bloody professional we are.
Where's that bloody cat? How can we carry on? What are we talking about? Oh yeah, attributes. Yeah, we're all 3 of us are domain controllers. I'm the master. So if we wanted to make sure that when we created a user account, we can store the national insurance number, we go to the Schema Master Me, and you say, look, by the way, Schema Master, there's a new attribute called national insurance number, and by the way, the object called user can contain that. And as the Schema Master, I'm responsible for telling you guys. Because when someone creates a user on your machines, because remember, when you're administering the domain, when you're creating a user, it could be on any one of them. You don't know. We don't care, really.
So somebody's delegated that responsibility to make sure that everybody else is told.
About the schema change, yeah. Now, you need to have one Schema Master per domain. You've got to have one, and that's why the first domain controller is the Schema Master. It establishes that as well.
Right.
Okay. Now, we can have a look at the schema, actually. Now I'm here. Now, the schema it's hidden away a little bit because modifying the schema and adding attributes, it's certainly not a day-to-day task. So there's no shortcut for the Active Directory schema tool. And what you have to do is actually build it yourself. Now, just to prove a point, I'm going to go through and go around a long way, which is just not going to work. And I've loaded up an MMC. Now, you don't know what an MMC is as yet, do you really? Yeah. MMC stands for Microsoft Management Console. It's like a framework console. And in that console, we can add snap-ins. And a snap-in really is just a flash word for an admin console. So this MMC, I could add in a snap-in for Active Directory users and computers. So let's just go File, Add Snap-in.
So it's allowing him to customise all the useful tools that for him, he works with on a regular basis. He can add those snap-ins.
Yeah.
And he's got a view of his IT world in a way that works for him.
Yeah, so for example, we just talked a lot about Active Directory, and we said, well, Active Directory and DNS, they go hand in hand with one another. So what I might do is I might build up a console, just like I've started to do here, with the snap-in Active Directory users and computers, and also the snap-in DNS. So I can just click on Add.
I suppose snap-in leads to a snapshot, so you can have like a snapshot of what's going on with everything in each section.
Again, that's one of those could be, but totally wrong.
But no.
No, I can see what you're saying, dude, but just don't think. You'll be okay. Okay, so I've just got two things in there. What did I load out the MMC? Oh yeah, Active Directory schema. That's what I was going to show you. Now, the Active Directory schema, that's a snap-in. File, Add Remove Snap-in. Oh dear, it's not there. I have to say that. Just 'cause. There you go, it's not there. Why? For the same reason, really, as regedit's not in your start menu. It's not a thing you use from day to day. What you actually got to do is register this little DLL file. And the DLL file we're registering is SCHM MGMT, which is the schema management snap-in tool. And once we've done that, hit return, it says it's been registered successfully. Only at that point will that snap-in be available to the MMC. So add remove snap-in, click on add, and I can now see Active Directory schema in there. Fucking amazing. And I'll put it in there twice, fault tolerance reasons. Okay, so we go down to Active Directory schema. Now, I talked about objects and attributes mainly because I learned X500 through Novell, and Microsoft sort of use slightly different terminologies, but they're sort of interchangeable nowadays. They use classes and attributes. So classes, I read objects, they read classes, same thing. But if they go into classes here, if I scroll down, these are a list of all the objects you can create in Active Directory. So what did you say? What can we create an Active Directory to? Users.
Workstations and users.
Users, okay. So look, there's a user object. Let's have a look at that. And let's have a look at the attributes a user can contain. Bad password time. Don't know what that is. Desktop profile, employee type, employee name, home phone number. So what I could easily do is to find a new attribute and add them into that user object here. So it's totally customizable, and that's another thing that's new with Active Directory.
Gotcha. And how do you add an attribute?
I can just go into attributes here.
All right. Okay.
Right click, say create attribute.
Okay.
So again, let's just save that one for. So that's the schema master. Now you need one of those per forest, per entire forest. And if you lose the schema master, what do you think is going to happen? So what's the schema do? The schema controls updates to the schema. So if I make a modification, that goes through the schema master and replicates onto you guys. So we're talking about the schema master.
Yeah.
What happens, we can only have one of these things per forest. I'm going to use that term now. That's going to form a little bit of your homework, I think. Okay, so you can have one schema master per forest, and the question was, what happens if that one schema master crashes? For some reason, it's struck by lightning, or a plane lands on it.
Well, you said that if a schema master is a domain controller, you've also got other domain controllers, i.e. me and Nick. So if yours goes down, there's us there to back up your information.
Okay, it's true to say we're all three of us at domain controllers, but I'm the schema master. And we said the schema master is required to control updates into the schema and to replicate those changes across. So my question to you is, what happens if the schema master, i.e. my machine dies, it crashes, and it just leaves you two up and running? Is that going to have an impact on the network? Will users still be able to log on? I'm going to say yes. Why? Why would a user want to change the schema? We already mentioned that you don't update the schema every day. The schema master, to be honest, if you lose it, you probably wouldn't notice it. You just wouldn't be able to update the schema. But think about how often you update the schema. You just simply don't. You might install Exchange and that will update it, or you might have a custom app and that might update it. But the schema master, you can live without it for a little while. You can do. Okay, so that's one of the single master operation roles, the schema master. Let's move on to, oh, for frick's sake, come back. Oh, it's back. Did you see that network shortcut thing? Okay, so the schema master, what should we do next? Domain naming master. Now what I've done, and I'm going to deliberately be quite vague over this one, is we've created a domain called itidiots.com, or sorry, ad.itidiots.com. What we could do if we expand out, we might decide to subdivide that single domain network into a multi-domain network and have, let's say, 3 or 4 domains. So that Surbiton have their own domain, Portsmouth have, should I say Portsmouth? Or Dudley have their own domain. We're expanding all the time. Now the domain naming master, you have one of these per forest, and all it does is it controls the addition and the removal of domains.
Okay.
So the domain naming master, the only time you'll notice that's gone is if you try and add a domain to your network or remove a domain, which again is not typical. You don't do that. These machines are important. You need to know where they are, but make sure you jot down where they are, because otherwise they'll be on the first DC. And I've been on quite a few networks now that have sort of grown into multi-DC networks, let's say 10 DCs, and they lose their first one because it was the machine they upgraded, let's say 2 or 3 years ago, and they think, oh, it's old, let's just switch that off, and all of a sudden their network doesn't work anymore, because there's a few other single master operations which are a lot more important. Let's go through one of them now. PDC emulator. Now the PDC emulator is there for a number of reasons. It pretends to be the PDC. Now in an NT4 network you didn't have DCs, domain controllers. You had primary domain controllers and backup domain controllers.
Okay.
You had one primary and as many backups as you wanted. But the difference between a primary and a backup is you couldn't write to the backup. You could only write to a primary. So in an NT4 network, if I'm the primary domain controller and you guys are backup domain controllers, if a user logs on, any one of us could authenticate it. If a user wanted to change their password, I would need to be up and running.
Okay.
Because a change of the password involves a write.
And so that goes back to you and you only.
Yeah. Now, if you have a 98 machine in your network, when that 98 machine tries to change their password, what's that 98 machine going to do? It's going to try and find the PDC. It doesn't know about Active Directory.
It doesn't have a clue.
So that machine, the PDC emulator, pretends to be the PDC for your older clients.
Okay.
Also, the PDC emulator in the domain, we could in theory add now an NT4 backup domain controller into this domain. So this PDC emulator would sync up the other PDCs. Some of the other things about PDC emulator, it's actually the time source of your network. The PDC emulator's clock is basically synchronized with the other domain controllers. So if my clock's wrong, that replicates with you, makes you wrong as well.
Yeah.
When clients log on to you, they set their clock to you. So time sync is, well, we've got it now in Active Directory. In NT4 we didn't really care too much about it, but in Active Directory time sync's really, really important. So the PDC emulator, if you lose that, you're going to notice that one very quickly.
Okay.
Especially if you've got older clients, they might not be able to log on. Okay. Infrastructure master. Now this is going to get a little bit complicated now, Chevy. Now we talked this before. We've got one domain, which I would say is fairly typical nowadays. It's
ultimately when you're designing a network, you all start with one domain, and you always go into multiple domains if there's reasons to. But if we are in a multi-domain structure, let's say we're all 3 domains now. So you've got your account database. I don't know anything about it.
Mhm.
You've got yours, Chevy. I don't know anything about it. I've got mine, and you don't know anything about that. Whereas now we're all in one domain. We're sharing information, aren't we? But if we're in 3 individual domains, Nick might have a group. He might have domain sales. It's got all of the sales users in it.
Mhm.
If I want his sales users to be able to print to my printer, what I could do is grab his sales group and put it inside one of my groups that have got power in my domain.
Okay.
Now, if you delete that group, I need to know about it because I need to update my group membership.
Yep.
The infrastructure master is responsible for informing other domains of... what's the best way of saying this? The actual Microsoft textbook answer is it deals with cross-domain references. There you go. Does that clear it up?
Clear as mud.
Okay, well, what that means is in my domain I've got an object that comes from another domain. If that other domain if that object's deleted in another domain, my domain needs to be updated. That
And that's
membership
its
needs to be updated.
responsibility
Yeah.
to-
That's one of its main responsibilities. It does do other things, but I'm hitting on the sort of main points now. Okay, schema, there's one missing. Domain naming master, infrastructure master. I can't think of the other one, PD Simulator. Help? Feedback at itidiots.com. Okay, we're going to have an edit point here.
No
That's
problem.
good. Infrastructure master, domain naming master, PDC emulator. RID master.
It's the RID master, Nicky, I think, is the one that
It's
you
the RID.
probably...
Actually, you can leave that gap in, can't you? Right, RID master. In NT4, every object that you create in a domain has got a unique identifier. And
Okay.
that's referred to as the SID, the security identifier. Okay. Now, at the moment, let's go with one domain. We're one domain. We're all 3 domain controllers in that domain, and we're running NT4.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, the only place you can create an object is where? On the PDC. Here. So when you create an object, I can say, right, that object's been created. I'm going to give it an ID of 1. The next object you create, I'm going to give it an ID of 2. Next one you create, I'm going to give it an ID of 3. It's very, very easy to make sure that these IDs haven't been used before. When you go into an Active Directory network, we're all DCs, and we can write to any one of those domain controllers.
So we need to be able to identify that and have the...
Yeah, you can perhaps see the problem. What happens if we get 2 people, 2 administrators, one's connected to me, one's connected to you, we both create a user account at the same time? What's to stop the ID number from being the same?
globally unique identifiers?
The globally identified... Shut it. Okay, what's to stop it is this. Every object in our domain starts with a fixed number. I'm going to say S123. And then there's small numbers afterwards. So S123 would be the domain portion of the SID. Now every object in this domain would be prefixed with S123.
Okay.
The remaining numbers, and it's much bigger than that, I'm just trying to make it a little bit easier to understand. The remaining numbers is the relative identifier of that object in the domain. Now what the RID master does is he says, right, you can have RIDs 1 to 500, you can have RIDs 501 to 1000, I have 1000 to 1500. So on Nick, when your user gets created, the full SID will be S123 from the first ID in your RID pool.
Okay.
If they just happen to connect to Shabby and create a user, it's going to be 0501. So I'm getting out. And if they connect to me, it's going to be S123 1, and the next user is going to be 2, 3, etc. And that's the job of the RID master. If you do leave the RID master, you've got 500 RIDs per DC to play with. If you do deplete all those RIDs, you won't be able to create any more objects, but I think you'll find that out a lot quicker than not be able to create an object. Well, I don't know, maybe not, who knows. So that's the 5 flexible single master operation roles. We've got the schema master, we've got the domain naming master, the PDC emulator, infrastructure master, and the RID master. Okay, so that's our 5 flexible single master operations. So just to recap again what we've done today, we've built the itidiots.com domain, we've verified DNS, we've done a little bit of work on the 5 flexible single master operation roles, and one thing I haven't really talked about really is what a domain is, what a tree is and what a forest is. So Shabby, that's your homework. I want you to find out what the hell a tree is, what a forest is, and how that relates to what I've been talking about today. So how a domain fits into that picture. And I really think once you've got that, you've got a really nice overview to work on. We've got an understanding of what a work group in a domain is. We can actually build a domain. We've seen the account database. There's quite a lot of technical aspects here, but again, it's really just to give us some awareness of when we move forward, we can investigate these things a little bit further. And that pretty much concludes today's lesson, I think, on creating a domain.
I think we covered quite a lot of technical content there.
I think there's some good stuff in there. I don't know how long the technical side was due. Was it about 40 minutes?
I'm sure I can edit it down to the best 5. No, that's pretty good.
That's not so bad, is it?
Yeah.
Any questions from you, Shabby? That's a cough, not a question. You spinning this?
I think he's pretty good to go. I think we can unleash him on our look after and administer our domain now.
You got a lot of notes there.
It's quite
Look,
fine.
he's written Shabby. You won't be able to read that, will you? You've written your name at the top. That's kind of...
No, that was a reference as thingy.
Oh, that's your user account.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's not half two of my notes.
Okay.
No, user account.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good. It's not bad. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, that concludes the little part of me. And now, Shabby, you can help me out a little bit because this week you probably noticed from the news and everything. London Marathon's coming up, and
All right, yeah,
you know,
that's all right.
I sort of thought about going for it, and at the moment I'm sort of practicing running, mainly to the toilet and back, and running to the shops and back.
What are you up to each day on your mileage?
I think I'm probably covering about not a mile yet, but I'm on the way.
Right.
But the reason I'm stopping and really is I'm getting a little bit of pain, from all this jogging in the morning, jogging to the bathroom, jogging to get the paper in the morning. I'm getting it's a little bit of pain just around the sort of chest area.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Really?
You get a little bit of bleeding around the nipple occasionally. And it's
Occasionally,
very sore and
it's
uncomfortable.
a little bit hard to talk about, but yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm experiencing.
I've been in training as well. I kept quiet about
Okay.
this, but I mean, now you've mentioned the fact you're going for it. I'm nowhere near a mile yet.
Okay.
But I've been feeling and suffering the same thing. I went to get some advice, and I got given this. It's maybe you might be able to tell us a little bit more about it, Shabby, and what it'll do for
Okay.
us.
Yeah, hello. It's called Lancinon. It's used for breastfeeding mothers. But
I'm not a
one
mother,
there,
and I'm
no.
not breastfeeding. Well, not that I'm aware of.
it's a cream used to alleviate sore nipples caused by breastfeeding.
Okay.
And if also, it's particularly good if, especially for marathon runners.
Jogger's nipple. It's good for jogger's nipple, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Excellent.
It contains lanolin. Now, some people may find that they're a little sensitive to lanolin, but what I suggest you do is that before you actually put it on your nipple, I suggest you put a little on the back of your palm for a skin patch test for about an hour or so to see if there's no ill effects.
A little bit like pain.
And well, it's more of an irritation.
Oh, okay.
So obviously you wouldn't put it on your nipple otherwise.
And what is it? 1 tube per nipple?
It's a
Do you get a left and a right tube?
Is this for?
it's depending on the size of the person.
Now, do I eat this? I mean, how do I use this product?
You apply it locally over the sore areas.
Oh, okay.
Usually morning, or say morning and evening as well. But like I said, it does contain lanolin, so if you find you're a little sensitive to it, I would recommend you wouldn't use it, and speak to your breastfeeding specialist or your trainer as well. Or if need be, just speak to your GP. It's not to be taken.
So I'm getting a box here.
But yeah, I recommend you use that for a week or two. You'd probably find...
Well, when is the marathon? That's coming up soon, isn't it?
I think it's...
I don't know, but as I say, my training's going pretty well.
next Sunday, is that right?
Bugger. We've got a lot of
We've got a lot of work to do.
We've got a long way
Okay,
to
well-
go. But anyway, I think... how do you pronounce that?
Lancino.
Lancino, for all your nipple-based issues.
Cool. Thanks
Thank you very much, Shabby.
Okay.
I think I think that's got to about wrap up another episode.
That might wrap it up. A news story. We had a news story feature last week, and when you were talking about boot camp, is there anything we can get Shabby to talk about this week? What's happening in IT this week? You've been looking into it. Have you got anything you discovered
anything
recently,
you've come
Shabby?
up.
During your device manager searching or Google searching? It was really scary the other day actually, because Shabby called me in and he was saying, Nicky, you asked for the specifications for these servers, but it's got R2 and all these new releases. It was just totally scary for a pharmacist to be talking about release 2 and things. But,
any news stories that you felt are worthy for you?
Call of Duty, how's that going?
I'm giving up on that, so that's going back. That's going on eBay soon. So
eBay, yes. How's that coming along? Are we preparing our first? We got a little slot coming up to try and recoup some money for this guy. So how's that going? Have you got your first item?
that'll be in the next issue. I think I'll sort that out actually in what order. Oh,
that Sony camcorder looked pretty cute.
Oh yeah, where is that? Is it around? Where's it around, dude?
No, I haven't bought it.
Now, Shabby bought a Sony camcorder. Oh, you haven't got it?
No, Nicky, sorry.
But I don't think it's Sony.
I think we're going to feature it next week. We'll do a technical overview and spec of this. It's a quality bit of gear.
Sony. It's the first Sony product I've seen that uses smart media rather than memory sticks. And the Sony logo is kind of interesting. I've got a feeling it's S0NY rather than SONY. But no, I think it's a pretty good buy there, Shabby. Again, probably sourced by the laptop guy.
The biggest,
let's not go there.
The biggest downside I found to Shabby's camcorder was it's actually just a digital camera, all wrapped up, and I think you've got some fake goods there, dude.
So the smart media card's probably worth something.
It's got to be worth something. So we're going to find something for Shabby to eBay next week, and I think we're going to try and make sure that does happen. But I think we've probably annoyed you enough for one episode. So I'm going to wrap this up. So anyone got anything interesting to add?
Just going to recap on the bigger picture of this podcast. We've done the domain, we've set that up now, so next week on this podcast we can take or drag Shifty along with the next thing, which would probably be resource permissioning or something like that. But we will be using this domain, the IT Idiots domain, to also demonstrate systems management server, Microsoft Operation Manager, and also Exchange. So, you know, this could turn into running a real-life network. And it could be a handy little podcast to watch. So that's all right.
I mean, I think the technical content's definitely going to come.
And the money, presumably, at some point would be nice.
And the fame and the women.
And the fame and the women. Yeah.
Okay, guys. Once again, if you want to give us your feedback, it's feedback@itidiots.com, and check us out on our website itidiots.com, and. I guess that's it.
That's it. All right, I'm going to go to the bathroom.
Take care.
See you guys later.
Eat paper now! Move that mountain of yours and get the paper if you can. Pulling that gargantuan cranium about. Yeah, that boy's head's like Sputnik. Spherical but quick twitchy in the past. Well, that was also, wasn't it? He'll be crying himself to sleep tonight on his huge pillow.